Hello and welcome to another glorious Victoria 3 video. This time we're going to be talking about the 14th Dev Diary, which is titled Political Movements. And what better place to bring us in than the artwork for this week, which is something we've seen before, of course, but it is indeed the suffragette movement, which it was a political movement, so it's a pretty appropriate, I think, image to have with this Dev Diary, which is, you know, it's kind of nice. It's kind of nice. You like to see it. You love to see it. So, let us get into the Dev Diary itself. It's Thursday again, and that means we're going to continue talking about politics in games. Nice opening phrase there. There's, people going to be a little salty about that, maybe? I don't know. Fuck them. Specifically, we'll be talking about political movements in Victoria 3. I touched a little bit on this feature back in the 6th Dev Diary, which I don't recall what that one was all about. Let me just remind myself. Interest groups. Gotcha. Okay. By saying that there are ways for politically disenfranchised pops to push for a reform, though that isn't the entirety of the role that political movements fill in the game. What then are political movements? Put simply, a political movement is a way for your pops to make it a direct demand of the government, either because they desire change or because they don't desire change that you're currently pushing through. A political movement is always aimed at one particular law and can take 3 different forms. We've got the movement to preserve, a political movement that can form where there is a sufficient opposition to the passing of a particular law. For example, if Great Britain starts replacing the monarchy with a republic, it's very likely that this will result in a movement to preserve the monarchy. Yes, there would. No, accurate. There would indeed be that movement. That would be a pretty strong movement, I would imagine. A movement to enact. It's a political movement that can form when there is a popular demand for the enactment of a particular law. For example, if you have politically active and literate but very poor underclass of labourers, these labourers might form a movement to create a minimum wage. Now we have the movement to restore. This is a political movement that works exactly like a movement to enact, but aims specifically to bring back a law that was previously in effect in the country. For example, a movement to restore the monarchy in a Britain that successfully transitioned into a republic. Successfully being... let's just say it's a matter of opinion. The main difference between a movement to restore and a movement to enact is the former will tend to get some extra support from being able to harken back to the golden era of the past instead of having to champion new ideas. I'm totally fine with this. I can't think of any other kind of movements that you would have because this sort of covers it, right? You're trying to change the law. No, we don't want that. There is, we want to change this law, and then there is, we want to go back to a law that was previously there. Like, what other kinds of movements specifically relating to laws do you really need? Movement to repeal, but that would kind of be like restore, because laws aren't a, there is no law, and then there is a law. It's a, there is this law, and we can replace it with this law. There is no such thing as no law, if you know what I mean. So there is no movement to repeal, because that would be, you know, it's movement to restore the previous version of the law. So yeah, I mean, it works for me. I can't think of anything that you would really need in here. Political movements have a singular goal and will exist only so long as this goal remains unfulfilled. Their impact on the country in pushing for said goal is determined by their support score. A political movement can have support from both interest groups, which represent a part of the political establishment backing the movement, and individual pops, which represents individuals championing the movement in the streets. So we have here a political movement to enact outlaw dissent and enact census suffrage. We've got a support score of 15%. There's no radicalism, so no one's trying to murder anyone yet. And these specific interest groups are backing them. Is this their clout, perhaps? Possibly. Although, I don't recognize this icon. Political movements are not always progressive. While the industrialists and intelligentsia want to expand the franchise in Prussia, a coalition of more conservative interest groups are simultaneously pushing for more censorship. Maybe this is the individual pops, actually. 127,000 individual pops. That makes more sense, I think. Yeah, I do think that way. So it's... the interest groups are just straight up backing or not backing, hence why they're here. And then you would imagine that you would see their clout is elsewhere, right? Whereas these are the individual pops. Okay, I like it. Interest groups will provide support for the movement based on their clout. There you go. While pops provide support based on raw numbers compared to the population as a whole, meaning that a single discriminated labourer backing a movement provides just as much support as a fully enfranchised aristocrat when taking action outside their interest group. In other words, while political strength still plays an important role in political movements, in the form of interest groups throwing their clout behind movements championing laws they like, it's entirely possible for a political movement to form with no interest group backing at all. Even if nobody is willing to champion workers' rights in the halls of power, enough angry workers in the streets may just be enough to affect the change anyway. Yeah, change doesn't come from the top, you gotta push for it, is something that other people have said that I agree with. Which interest groups will or will not back a political movement depends on whether they would approve of a change to the new law, in the case of enact and restore, or disapprove of the current change in progress, in the case of preserve. Interest groups that have high approval, or which are part of the government, will not support political movements, though government interest groups may put pressure on you in other ways if they're not pleased with your actions. Good to know. Pops are more complex, as they can back a political movement either because it aligns with their political movement, i.e. their preferred interest group is in favour of the movement, or because they have something to gain directly from it. For example, a discriminated pop backing a movement that would give them more rights. Yeah. Although, there are countless examples of individual people backing movements that do not benefit them in the slightest. Think of the poor people that celebrate the Conservative Party in the UK, for example. Yeah, I can see... hopefully it's not just, like... it should be because they believe they have something to gain directly from it. Not that they have, right? Because they have kind of makes me think it's like a mechanical... this pop would gain this amount of whatever... and no, their status score or their quality of life score, I can't remember what it's called. Standard of living, that's the one. Their standard of living would go up by 1 point if they back this political movement. That's what this makes me feel like. It's mechanical, right? Whereas they believe they have something to gain from it, kind of gives a bit of wiggle room. And I think that wiggle room is more reliably historical, or reliably realistic. So, the political movement to abolish the regressive poll tax is currently only backed by the trade unions and pops sympathetic to them. So, 290,000 pops and the trade unions, but that trade union has a lot of clout, 7% clout, and the pops are actually only giving 6%, although add these both together and you get 14%, because paradox math and not showing decimal places. We probably should show the decimals in these cases. Anyway, the support score of a political movement has two direct effects on legislation. Firstly, it affects the chance of successfully passing a law, making it easier to pass the law the movement wants in the case of a movement to enact or restore, or more difficult to replace in the case of a movement to preserve even, not persevere. Having any movement to enact or restore also allows a country to attempt to pass the law the movement wants, even if said law has no backing among the interest groups in government. Right, that's interesting, because it's what we've heard so far from interest groups is you really want to be managing your interest groups and seeing, these guys, the industrialists, for example, are in favor of this law that I want, so I'm going to try my best to have them have some power so that I can pass the law that I want. Whereas here it's like, or you could just see if there is a particularly large group of individual pops that want something that you want, then you won't have to go through the interest group route. Though it seems like this will be a little bit less easy to manage. You won't have too much control over this. But even so, like, two different routes to the same goal is, yeah, it's good. It's good. So, but what then if you don't intend to bow to the wishes of a movement in your country? This is where radicalism of a political movement comes in. Radicalism is based on the number of radical pops and the clout of angry interest groups supporting the movement. A movement with low radicalism is one that is intent on getting its wishes heard through peaceful means, while a movement with high radicalism is willing to use more extreme methods, up to and including sparking a revolution, though that particular topic is something we'll cover in a later dev diary. So, replacing the monarchy with a republic is not a popular idea in Sweden in 1836. The opposition is both strong and highly radicalized. A civil war is all but guaranteed unless the government reverses course. So yeah, 237% radicalism. Yeah, no, I can see that being a thing. The cloud of angry supporting interest groups, 188%, and by 38,000 radicals plus 45%. So, you know, you'll be able to see which interest groups are in there beneath the tooltip. So we've got whoever they are. I think that's intelligentsia, but these icons are just slipping past me. Until I get to play the game, they're probably not going to be something I remember frequently. But anyway, yeah, that makes sense to me. It is by no means a sure thing that every peaceful movement will become radical, and movements may very well fizzle out without accomplishing their goals. But ignoring the wishes of significant parts of your population and or political establishment does come with some associated risks. When talking about political movement radicalism, I mentioned radical pops, and since they play an important role in creating and radicalizing political movements, I thought I'd take a little time to explain how radical pops and their loyalist counterparts function in Victoria 3. The first thing that should be understood about radicals and loyalists is that just like with interest group membership, radicals and loyalists are not whole pops, but rather individuals within pops. So, starting a game as France by hiking the taxes up as high as possible and slashing government military salaries is a surefire way to watch the number of radicals quickly climb. It's good that we've got a graph as well to see how many radicals we have. That'd be, we're doing a census every single day of the week. Just tick this box if you angry, basically. Radicals are individuals who have become disillusioned with the government. I mean, if that was the whole story, then 100% of the world is now radical, and political apparatus of the country and want to seek change through any means necessary, while loyalists are patriots who are generally willing to put their political views and goals aside for the sake of the nation. There's a large variety of ways that pops can become radicals or loyalists. Here are a few of the more common reasons listed below. So, if the pop experiences an increase in material living standards, it'll become more loyal. A decrease in material living standards become more radical. Standard of living is below the minimum they expect to have, will radicalize over time. If they're illiterate but discriminated against, they tend to radicalize over time. From political movements whose demands are ignored, may radicalize over time. And pops from political movements that have their demands fulfilled become more loyal. Lovely stuff. Radicals and loyalists generally function in directly opposite ways. For example, radicals are more likely to create and join political movements, as well as contributing to radicalizing said movements, while loyalists will never join political movements. Loyalists make the interest groups they are part of happier, while radicals make them less happy, and so on. This means that one way to prevent political activism and curtail movements that oppose your agenda is to increase the standard of living of your pops. Just because you at some point during the game created prosperity as a result of a bunch of loyalists, it doesn't mean everyone will just be on board with your program forever, though. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, everyone just wants a higher standard of living. So if you increase people's standard of living, you are doing a good job as a government person, is the way I see it, at least. So yeah, cool. I'm trying to think, is there any other things that I think radicals and loyalists should be doing here? I don't know. I can't think of anything. Yeah. They will remain radical or loyalist until they either die or have a status change as a result of becoming more radical or loyal. For example, a loyalist pup might stop being a loyalist pup if their material standard of living suddenly takes a nosedive. But they do in fact die. As generations die off and are replaced by new ones, less and less people will remember all the great things you did for the country 30 years ago and will start wondering instead what you've done for them lately. Yeah, that's good, that's fair. It depends on how fast the game tends to go. Whether this ends up being like, oh, come on, I just gave these people what they want. Why are they back to being radical again? But if you were, able to play at a lower speed and still have fun, then that's going to be a lot more palatable than if, you're speed 5ing through and you're constantly having to, fix your radicals again. Yeah, with that said, let's wrap up for this Dev Diary. Next week we'll be talking more about politics on a topic that's much relates to political movements by being one of the most monumental political questions of the 19th century. Slavery. Oh, nice. That's it's gonna be a bright one, isn't it? Oh, actually, I remembered what I wanted to say here. It may look initially like, oh, well, I just want loyalists then. Like at first glance, yeah, loyalists look better. They'll make people happy. Well, they are happier. They make the interest groups happier. They'll be easier to manage, less problems. Whereas radicals look at first glance like things you don't want. They make people unhappy. They may cause rebellions, revolutions. They are generally a pest. But just like in Victoria 3, there are benefits to having a group of politically active and unhappy people. They push through for reforms. They push for laws, right? One of the things they said here, that if radicals want to have a law passed, and if you're, if you're ignoring a pop's political demands, then they'll become more radical over time. But if they, if there are a bunch of radicals, they're going to be, a bit more pushy for whatever law it is they're passing. And if that's a law that you want, you might need the radicals to be a little bit more pushy because you may not have the support of the interest groups, right? This is what I was saying before, that there's a couple of ways around getting the laws that you want passed. If none of the interest groups are in favor of, take a completely random example out of the hat, universal healthcare, right? But you have a large group of pops that are all about that sweet ass universal healthcare, then having a large amount of those pops kind of radicalize and make it easier for you to be like, look, interest groups, I know that you don't want it, and I swear I don't want it either, but look at the radicals, right? We're gonna have a rebellion if we don't implement universal healthcare, and then you just slide it in to appease the radicals, but it's also something that you would want because it is universally a good thing to have. Something like that, there are. It's not like, just like with so many things in Victoria 3 so far, nothing seems like it is universally good or universally bad. Like in every other Paradox game, it's like, oh, debt is bad. But you can deficit spend in Victoria 3, and debt is not objectively bad. And then here with radicals, they're not universally bad. High prices on bread, not universally bad. Low prices on bread, not universally bad. Right? It's so interesting. I love it. It's so interesting. But we also have some comments, so let us get down to those, and we will sort out that so we can see the comments very nicely. So, how does policing play into this? Radical pops are a source of turmoil, which has a number of negative effects on your states. Various policing laws provide the law enforcement institution with methods for dealing with the effects of that turmoil. Some laws also provide access to decrees that can have more direct impact on the radical elements of your population. But in both of these cases, you're dealing with the people who support them, not the political movement as an entity. You can't kill an idea, excuse me. Yeah, that it's like it's the standard phrase of, you're attacking the symptom instead of the disease. The disease in this case being people wanting shit, and instead you're killing the people instead of the wanting shit. Do nationalists and pan-nationalists also try to push for independence or unification through these movements? Will there be movements demanding reconquest of lost territory? That's an interesting one. At the moment, we only use political movements for pop desires that relate to laws. Other desires, such as independence, are modelled differently. Okay. If we run out of text to advance the economy, assuming we're otherwise in a socialist utopia, and standard of living, will all pops inevitably slide towards radicalism? We'll talk more about technology in another dev diary, but our general approach to text is that they should unlock things, not impose automatic instant change across your whole country as soon as you get access to them. Most technological change comes with some sort of cost, or at least impact. For example, a more efficient production method might come with a new input goods cost, or decreased workforce who need new employment. So I'll hedge this response by first saying that our aim is that even if you can plow through the tech tree early, you should still have to struggle to implement all those novelties by game end. With that caveat in mind though, sure, rapid progress means you have to fight even harder to sustain that progress. Any decline in living conditions is unacceptable after all. Makes me think that maybe the game should model like technology going a little bit after the end date for the people who manage to, you know, get all the techs. And like, if you manage to get all of the technology by, say, 1820, right, you've got 16 years of the game left. If the game doesn't model technologies that came after that, even hypothetical ones, then you're left in a situation where your nation grinds to a halt technologically and plateaus, not because of anything you've done, no, you know, logical, immersive reason for this plateau, and simply because game ran out of code for you, which is a bit immersion breaking, of course. So I think the game does need, perhaps, to model technologies going past what is reasonably possible. Let me know if you agree with that one, because I'm not sure. Because on one hand, you can say, oh, well, Paradox will have modeled it so that you won't be able to reach the end of the tech tree by the end of the game. And in that case, I'll say somebody's going to figure out how. But on the other hand, say they do this. Say they add technologies that, in a reasonable playthrough, would have lasted until 1950, right? That then becomes the end of the tech tree, and people will still get to the end of it. And where does that end? So it's an interesting question that nobody asked except me. I think... I don't know. I'd like to know what you guys think. So, as always, if you have comments and thoughts and stuff, leave it in the comment section below, because I do read them. So, can pops or interest groups support more than one movement at the same time? Yes. Any word on political parties? No further word on this yet. It's still on the table. A big pile of things that is on that table. That's fair enough. So, ability to enact a reform the movement wants is always granted. Does this mean that if the small groups of socialists want healthcare, I can theoretically try to enact it, even if I'm an absolute monarchy, or intellectuals pushing for public schools? Yes, because even if the people in charge might fundamentally disagree, if the rabble on the street is demanding it, perhaps the topic becomes more relevant to them. But there's sure to be a lot of dissent during the process of enacting such a law. It might take a long time and require a lot of concessions. Yeah, this is what I'm saying, right? Even if none of your interest groups want a thing, having radicals wanting the thing may be something you want. You, as the absolute monarch, still need the backing of your interest groups, because an absolute monarchy is politically not really that absolute, right? They still rule based on the goodwill of the people they are ruling. So, yeah, if you don't have the support of the powerful people that you're ruling, having the support of lots of the not so powerful people you're ruling is the next best thing. What if movements contradict each other? Let's say we have intellectuals pushing for public schools and devouts for religious. How does this impact ability to introduce one of those reforms. Let's say we have private schools. Both would impact their respective law, but not the other one. What's more common is that you start to enact one law that's demanded by a certain popular movement, and once you start that process, another movement forms to preserve the old law. In this case, the movement to enact the new law would increase its chance of passing, while the movement to preserve the old one would try to cause it to stall, so the final impact would depend on the relative support values of two groups. That's going to be interesting, because what if you think you have enough support to pass a law based on the interest groups, based on the political movement and all that, but you start passing that law thinking you've got plenty, you've got it well enough, and a movement to preserve the original law pops up, and it is very much more powerful. Hopefully you have the ability to cancel a law in progress, right? Because if not, oh boy, you done fucked it up. What advantage, if any, does the player have to promote radicalism? In Vic 2, this allowed you to pass progressive reforms in a prominently reactionary society. Are there any other ways to play than promoting loyalists? If the player wants to change a backward society with aristocrats having a lot of power, maybe radicalizing some pups may help the player approve necessary laws to transform society. Again, this is basically going back to what I've said already. Promoting the appearance of radical movements is certainly a thing you can do to affect change in your country rapidly. First off, since radicals are more prone to join movements, having lots of radicals will make for stronger movements, which lets you pass the laws they want faster and easier. It's also possible to foster a revolution on purpose, though this can be a dangerous gambit, no shit, and obviously lead to a huge loss of life and other devastation to your nation. How reversible is changing laws in your country? Can you change them every election without penalties? I like the idea of a nation state of mind to approve laws and not only a player decision, but something that has to be worked on. You can attempt to change them as often as you like, but each one is a process, potentially destabilizing one, and you can only enact one law at a time. So flip-flopping between laws is a pretty good way of making just about everyone unhappy in the long run. Alright. I think you said elsewhere that there aren't age pyramids, so I guess when there is a death in a pop that has a chance to reduce the loyalists or radical count that's proportionate to the number of loyalists or radicals in a pop. Can a pop have loyalists and radicals at the same time? A single pop can have only either loyalists or radicals. If the pop has loyalists and become more radical, the effect cancels out the loyalists instead until there are none left, at which point it would start gaining radicals instead. Deaths reduce loyalists, radicals, literate, qualifications, etc. by roughly proportionate amounts, yes. So over time, pops will trend towards neutrality, faster the shorter their life expectancy is. Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you don't model age, that seems to be the way you're going to have to do it. I have said before that it'd be nice for them to model age, but that also kind of makes you need to model every single pop individually, which, yeah, it's not really feasible. So pop can either vote with their interest group or for their own interest, which makes sense. None of this has anything to do with votes, though. I feel like something that's missing is pops voting against their own interest due to things other than loyalty alone, such as factionalism or a system of patronage like political machines. So yeah, it's nothing to do with votes. Political movements are about a major political will among interest groups or grassroots organizations in favor of or opposition to specific laws. Votes and electoral mechanics is something entirely different. In these contexts, pops can certainly vote against their best interests. Good! That's what I like to see. That's what I like to see. History is full of people, and also the present, is full of people voting against their best interests. So, yes, good. Very, very happy to see that. I'll get around to that in later dev diaries. Are there any ways for the player to interact with the movements apart from enacting laws they push for? Any promotion, suppression mechanic? We currently have some interactions for suppressing or promoting certain interest groups depending on what's permitted or enabled by your laws, and the aforementioned methods for dealing with radical pops, but the political movements themselves are more to be seen as a zeitgeist rather than an organization with a headquarter your secret police can knock on the door of, so we don't have any direct interactions with movements. Okay. Suppress the movement by dropping pamphlets with anti-your movement rhetoric on them. Can all pops get involved in political movements, or are some types excluded? For example, slaves, colonized pops, and unaccepted cultures. Everyone can get involved on an individual level, but the ones you mention have no or very limited political strength, and so cannot act through interest groups. One of the primary reasons for the system is to permit an alternate avenue for disenfranchised pops to have a say in the country's politics, especially if things get bad enough for them. Yeah, I mean, slaves having a political movement to not have slaves, makes entire sense. Especially considering, like we saw above, radicalized pops couldn't start revolutions. Perhaps there is, I don't know, let's take a random island in the Caribbean, maybe Haiti, and say that, you know, perhaps the slaves on Haiti become radicalized in their political movement to not be slaves, and they become radicalized and ignored to the point where they start a revolution and break away and become a country that isn't part of France. Just hypothetically speaking. Yeah, it makes sense for slaves, even if they have no political power, to be able to join political movements. That makes sense to me. Like, mechanically, you know. Looks very nice. They mentioned the possibility of movements fizzling out over time instead of becoming more and more radical. Can you tell us a bit more about how that happens? If movements' demands have gone unfulfilled for a long time without becoming radical enough to start a revolution, they'll eventually gain the chance to dissolve randomly. So as long as you can keep radicalism down, you can wait out the clock until the population's grown tired of asking. Would that happen? I guess. How can you see a breakdown of what interest groups and pops are supporting a given political movement? Interest group breakdown is shown by hovering the underlined percentage, and pop breakdown isn't added yet as polish pass isn't done. Alright, and that is the end of the questions and answers. Yeah, no, it's certainly interesting stuff. It's certainly interesting stuff indeed. I guess my initial thoughts are that I can't see anything that is egregiously wrong about this, you know? Everything seems on the level, everything seems like it is a decent way to model political movements. You know, I don't know how else to put it, you know? Yeah, it's just good shit. It's just good shit. I think it kind of it feels realistic. It feels, you know, logical. And I like it. Do you like it? Tell me in the comments below. But yeah, that is it for this video. Thank you all very much for watching. If you want to keep up to date with all Victoria 3 news and updates, subscribe, like the video, and yeah, good one. It was a good dev diary. Good dev diary. I liked it. It was interesting. Good stuff. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.